Evergreen Hollow was a place straight out of a postcard. It was the kind of town where snow always fell in December, blanketing the streets and rooftops in a peaceful hush. Icicles dangled from old gas lamps, and the smell of pine and chimney smoke filled the air. But beneath its postcard-perfect charm lay a chilling legend that no one dared to discuss openly. The townsfolk carried the weight of it in their cautious glances and hushed conversations. They avoided the old Frostwood Bridge, never ventured into the woods at night, and during the Christmas season, they locked their doors and refused to sing. Laura and Ethan knew none of this when their family moved to the Hollow. For them, the move was a new beginning. Their father had inherited an old Victorian mansion on the edge of town from a distant relative. And while the house was drafty and filled with creaking floorboards, it felt like an adventure. But from the moment they arrived, the siblings noticed something strange. The townsfolk were friendly enough, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes when they spoke of the house. "It's historic," an old shopkeeper had said hesitantly when their mother mentioned the address. "Charming," another neighbor added, though she made a point to look anywhere but at the house when she passed by. Laura brushed it off as small-town gossip, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't long before they found out just how right he was. It was a week before Christmas when the carolers came for the first time. The night was bitterly cold. The kind of cold that seeped through the walls no matter how high you turned the heat. Snow fell steadily, coating the cobblestone streets in a pristine white. Laura was in her room, reading by the glow of her bedside lamp, while Ethan played video games in the room next to hers. Their parents were downstairs, decorating the tree. Everything felt calm, almost cozy, until the singing began. It was faint at first, a soft melody carried on the wind. Silent night, holy night. The sound was hauntingly beautiful but eerie, as if the voices carried an unnatural echo. Laura paused, her book forgotten, and tilted her head toward the window. The singing grew louder, clearer, as if the singers were moving closer. Curious, she pulled back the curtain and peered outside, under the glow of the street lamp. A group of carolers stood motionless in the snow. They were dressed in Victorian-era clothing, long, flowing dresses and heavy coats with lace collars. Their hymn books were open in their gloved hands, but their faces weren't human. Beneath their bonnets and hats were hollow skulls, their empty eye sockets glowing faintly in the darkness. Their mouths gaped open as they sang, revealing jagged, uneven teeth that seemed far too sharp. Laura stumbled back from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. "Mom! Dad!" she shouted, her voice trembling. Her parents came running, followed closely by Ethan. But when they looked outside, the street was empty. The carolers were gone. The next morning, Laura tried to convince herself it had been a dream, but Ethan's expression over breakfast told her otherwise. "You heard them too, didn't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura hesitated, then nodded. "I saw them. They weren't human, Ethan." Ethan's face paled, but his curiosity seemed to outweigh his fear. He spent the rest of the day researching the town's history online, scouring old archives and forums for answers. By evening, he had found something. "It's a legend," Ethan said, spreading out a stack of printed articles on his bed. The Frostwood Carolers. According to the stories, over a century ago, a group of 8 carolers had died tragically on Christmas Eve. They were traveling to a neighboring town when their carriage skidded off the icy Frostwood Bridge and plunged into the frozen river below. Their bodies were never recovered. Since then, locals claim the carolers return every December, haunting the streets of Evergreen Hollow. They sang their eerie carols to lure the living to their doom. Anyone who heard their song was marked, and the only way to escape their fate was to join the carolers in their eternal choir. Over the next few nights, the carolers returned. Laura and Ethan began hearing their songs more frequently, and each time, the melodies grew louder, more insistent. Their parents dismissed it as local kids playing pranks, but the siblings knew better. The carolers weren't just singing, they were leaving signs. One morning, Laura found a single frosty handprint on her bedroom window. Despite the fact that her room was on the second floor, Ethan discovered a hymn book on his desk. Its pages frozen solid. When he opened it, he found only one line written in jagged, blood-red script. Asterisk, sing with us or perish. Asterisk. The final straw came when Laura woke to find her room filled with an unbearable cold. Her breath fogged the air, and when she turned toward the window, she saw them, the carolers, standing in a perfect line outside. They didn't move, didn't sing, but their hollow eye sockets seemed to peer straight through her. Terrified, Laura and Ethan knew they had to act. They researched every old tale they could find about ghosts and hauntings, taking notes on protection rituals and exorcisms. By Christmas Eve, they had a plan. Armed with flashlights, salt, and iron rods, they decided to confront the carolers head-on. "We can't keep running," Ethan said, his voice shaking but determined. "If we don't stop them, they'll never leave us alone." Laura nodded, though fear coiled in her stomach. "We stick together, no matter what." That night, the singing began again, louder than ever. "God rest ye merry, gentlemen." The melody reverberated through the house, shaking the walls. Laura and Ethan stepped outside, their flashlights cutting through the swirling snow. The carolers stood at the gate, their skeletal faces illuminated by the street lamp's glow. Their mouths moved in perfect harmony, but their eyes remained fixed on the siblings. "What do you want?" Laura shouted, her voice trembling. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence. One of the carolers stepped forward, its bony hand clutching a hymn book. When it spoke, its voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You belong to us now. Sing or join the dead." Ethan threw a handful of salt at the figure, and it let out an unearthly screech as its form dissolved into mist. But the others didn't flinch. Instead, they opened their hymn books and began to sing once more. The melody was overpowering, filling the air with a terrible, inescapable pull. Laura felt her feet moving against her will, dragging her closer to the carolers. She fought with all her strength, but the music was too strong. Beside her, Ethan struggled, his eyes wide with terror. In a desperate act, Laura reached for the iron rod strapped to her back and swung it at the nearest caroler. The figure shattered like glass, its shards disappearing into the night. The remaining carolers paused, their hollow sockets glowing with fury. "You cannot escape the song," one of them hissed. "The mark must join us." But Laura and Ethan refused to give up. They used everything they had, salt, iron, and sheer determination, to fight off the spectral figures. One by one, the carolers dissolved into mist, their haunting melody fading with them. By the time the last figure disappeared, the siblings were exhausted, their breath fogging the icy air. For the first time in days, the silence felt peaceful. The next morning, Laura and Ethan convinced their parents to leave Evergreen Hollow. The family packed up and moved far away, hoping to put the nightmare behind them. But deep down, Laura knew it wasn't over. Months later, on a warm spring night, she woke to the faint sound of singing outside her window. The carolers were still waiting.